The engine stayed running longer than it should have, the red glow of the dashboard cutting through the dark like a warning I didn't yet understand. Streetlights flickered on wet pavement, and the quiet inside the car felt heavier than exhaustion, heavier than fear. My body knew something was wrong before my mind caught up, a tightness settling in my chest as seconds stretched too long. If you're listening to this right now, take a moment to subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because moments like this don't announce themselves, and they happen to ordinary people every day. I remember staring at my hands, noticing how still they were, how practiced my routine had made me blind. Outside, the night looked the same as it always had, but inside me, something was breaking open. I thought I was just tired. I thought this was nothing. I didn't know yet that my life had already shifted, quietly, irreversibly. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I never thought the night I did not go home would be the night my life split in two. It was a Thursday in December, just after midnight, when I learned how close danger can stand without making a sound. I am 64 years old, a widow, and I worked the night shift at a hospital. By that hour, my body was heavy with exhaustion, my mind dulled by fluorescent lights and habit. I was not brave or important. I was just tired, ready for sleep, trusting the familiar path that had carried me home so many times before. What I did not know was that someone had already been watching me, someone I had passed without fear, someone who knew my schedule better than I did. The threat was not a possibility waiting in the future. It was close, quiet, and already in motion. I learned later that my safety did not change because I suddenly became stronger or wiser. It changed because another person noticed something small that I overlooked and refused to dismiss it. That night taught me how thin the line is between ordinary and irreversible, and how survival can hinge on a single choice. Before anything went wrong, my life had already grown very quiet. After my husband died, the house in Cedar Grove felt larger than it ever had before. Silence settled into every room, one plate on the table, one mug cooling by the sink. Grief did not arrive loudly. It thinned my days until they felt lighter and harder to hold at the same time. The insurance covered the funeral, barely. What it did not cover was the future. Bills did not pause for mourning. Property taxes still came. Groceries still cost what they cost. I had retired once, believing teaching would be the last chapter of my working life, but plans mean very little when survival steps in. So in my early 60s, I went back to work, not chasing purpose or pride, just stability. The hospital hired me for the night shift in records, 3 nights a week, long corridors, dim lights, work that mattered only when something went missing. No one really saw us unless something broke. I liked that. Invisibility felt safer than being noticed. I learned to measure stability differently. It was not comfort. It was predictability. Knowing when the bus arrived, knowing which street stayed quiet after midnight, knowing exactly how long it took to unlock my door and set my bag down, routine gave me the illusion of control in a life that had taken so much without warning. At the time, I believed those patterns were protecting me. I did not yet understand how easily comfort can turn into blindness, or how the habits that steady us can also make us visible in ways we never intend. Routine became my quiet companion after everything else fell away. I built my days around exact timing because predictability felt like safety. The bus came at 11:30 p.m. My shift ended 10 minutes earlier. I knew which corner stayed lit and which streets emptied first. I knew how long it took my feet to carry me from the stop to my door. Those details made the world feel manageable. When you live alone long enough, structure replaces comfort. I did not think of it as fear. I thought of it as responsibility. Leaving early would cost hours I could not afford to lose. Staying late meant trusting the system that had always worked before. Routine gave me control, or at least the impression of it. Then the route changed. Budget cuts. Reduced service. The last bus now left before my shift ended. Standing outside the hospital one night, staring at an empty street, I felt exposed in a way I had not felt in years. I could leave work early and lose pay, or I could find another way home. That was how I ended up opening a rideshare app for the first time, my phone heavy in my hand. I checked the screen twice. I hesitated longer than I should have. Asking for help felt like admitting weakness. I told myself it was temporary, just transportation, a small adjustment to keep life moving forward. I had no idea I was stepping into the moment where everything changed. The driver who picked me up that first night did not feel like a stranger for long. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Middle-aged, quiet, steady. His car was clean but not showy. The radio stayed low. He drove the same way every time, unhurried, attentive, like someone who respected the road and the people on it. What stayed with me was how little he asked of me. No pressure to talk, no curiosity that felt intrusive. I could sit with my thoughts after a long shift and simply exist. After weeks of working nights, that mattered more than conversation. In those early hours, being allowed to be silent felt like a kindness. He began picking me up regularly, same corner, same time. I noticed how he waited until I was fully inside the car before pulling away, how he adjusted the heat without comment when the temperature dropped. Small things, ordinary things, the kind you almost miss if you are not paying attention. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a transaction. I felt seen without being examined. There was a gentle respect in that space, a sense that I did not need to explain who I was or why I was tired. For a widow who had grown used to being invisible, that quiet acknowledgement was grounding. The rides blended together, night after night. Nothing went wrong. My guard lowered without me noticing. Trust did not arrive as a decision. It settled in through repetition. Only later did I understand that those uneventful rides were building something I would depend on. At the time, they felt like nothing more than a reliable way home, a small pocket of calm before sleep. I did not yet know how fragile that comfort was, or how quickly it could be disturbed. That night began like all the others. Same pickup spot, same hour. I slid into the back seat expecting the familiar quiet, already letting my shoulders drop. Habit told me I was safe. Routine told me nothing required my attention. Then I noticed the stillness. The car did not pull away right away. The engine idled longer than usual, a few seconds stretching into something heavier. I felt it before I understood it, a tightening low in my chest. Nothing obvious had changed, yet everything felt misaligned, like a picture hanging just slightly crooked on the wall. I became aware of small things. The way his hands rested on the steering wheel without moving, the way the mirrors were adjusted, then adjusted again. The silence felt different, no longer comfortable but watchful. My thoughts, usually scattered after work, sharpened all at once. I told myself I was overreacting. Fatigue can do that. Grief can do that. Still, my body did not listen. My breathing slowed on purpose. I sat straighter. I stopped leaning into the seat and began tracking time without meaning to. When we finally moved, the route felt familiar at first, but the pauses between turns were wrong, deliberate, measured. I noticed how carefully the speed was controlled, how the usual rhythm of the drive had disappeared. That was when confusion gave way to fear, not panic, not yet, but a clear internal signal I had learned to respect. This was not a mistake. This was a decision. The comfort I had relied on slipped away quietly, without warning. I understood, in that moment, that whatever had been protecting me before was no longer enough, and that something unseen had just stepped closer. When he finally shared what he had been noticing, it came slowly, almost carefully, like he was choosing each thought with restraint. I remember the way my stomach tightened as pieces began to surface that I had never thought to connect. He had noticed a man near my house, not once, but often. Someone who lingered too long near the same spot on my block. Someone who seemed to know when I arrived home and when I left. At first, he assumed coincidence. Drivers see patterns everywhere, but the pattern did not fade. It sharpened. Over time, he noticed the timing. The nights I worked, the nights I did not. How often the same figure appeared shortly before my car pulled up. How that person's attention never drifted toward traffic or neighbors, only toward my door. I felt myself wanting to interrupt, to explain it away, to name a harmless reason. My mind searched for ordinary answers because the alternative felt unbearable. Then came the detail that broke through my denial. He had seen that man approach my porch when I was not home. Not knock, not leave anything behind. Just stand there, too close, long enough to test something, long enough to learn. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up. My hands went cold. My mouth felt dry. I tried to tell myself it could still be nothing, that I was misunderstanding. But fear has its own clarity. It strips away comfort and leaves only what matters. This was not a vague warning. This was not a future risk. The threat was already tied to my address, my schedule, my habits. My home was no longer a safe endpoint. It was part of the pattern. As he finished, my mind raced backward through weeks of small moments I had ignored, glances I had dismissed, unease I had smoothed over. Everything rearranged itself at once, and I understood that what was happening was not random. It was personal, intentional, and already in motion. After that realization, my mind did not move forward. It raced backward. Moments I had stored away as ordinary began resurfacing with sharp edges, rearranging themselves into something I could no longer ignore. I thought about the evenings when I felt watched, but dismissed it as nerves. The times I noticed someone lingering near the mailboxes and told myself I was being dramatic. The way my porch light sometimes seemed to glow longer than I remembered, as if it had been tested while I was gone. None of it had felt urgent then. It had all lived in the category of probably nothing. At work. I remembered the nights I stayed later than usual and felt a strange pressure to leave quickly. The sense that someone might be waiting, even though I never saw anyone. I had blamed fatigue. I had blamed grief. Those explanations were easier than accepting uncertainty. Even my routine began to look different. The predictability I relied on had not just steadied me, it had outlined me. My habits, my schedule, my entrances and exits had formed a map that someone else could read. Familiarity had dulled my instincts, teaching me to overlook the quiet signals meant to protect me. What unsettled me most was how invisible the threat had been while it was happening. There had been no dramatic warning, no clear line between safe and unsafe, just a series of moments that only made sense once I knew where to look. As the weight of that understanding settled in, reflection stopped being enough. Awareness alone could not keep me safe. I felt urgency replace analysis, a need to act before memory turned into regret. Once the truth settled, there was no room left for debate. Fear stripped away every excuse I had used to protect my pride. I understood, with sudden clarity, that thinking my way through this would not keep me safe. Action was the only language that mattered now. I accepted help without arguing. That surprised me. I had spent years doing everything on my own, convincing myself independence was strength. In that moment, strength looked different. It looked like listening. It looked like letting someone else take the lead while my hands still trembled. I stopped worrying about being polite or calm. I stopped measuring my words. My focus narrowed to the next right step, then the one after that. Leaving my usual route felt unreal, like stepping out of my own life and watching it continue without me. Every familiar landmark passed by the window felt suddenly unsafe, as if recognition itself had become a risk. As we moved farther away, something inside me went quiet. Fear gave way to a kind of emotional numbness, the shock that follows when your body realizes how close it came to harm. I remember noticing details without feeling them, the glow of streetlights, the empty sidewalks, the steady movement forward. By the time we reached a place where authority and protection waited, I was no longer questioning whether this was necessary. The decision had already been made. Survival had chosen for me. I knew the next step would be harder in a different way. Telling strangers what I had learned, turning fear into facts, handing my story over so it could become evidence. Once the evidence was laid out, doubt stopped being an option. What I had carried as fear was replaced by something colder and heavier. Proof has a way of changing the air in a room. I felt it the moment the details were reviewed and taken seriously. There were records showing repeated presence near my home, timestamps that matched my work schedule too closely to dismiss, footage that confirmed movement on my porch when I was away. I watched professionals shift from listening politely to focusing intently, their questions narrowing, their posture changing. No one needed to tell me what that meant. Their reaction said enough. What unsettled me most was how methodical it all looked when placed together. This was not impulsive behavior. It was planned, observed, repeated. Seeing it documented stripped away any lingering belief that I had imagined the danger. Then came the detail that deepened everything. The neighbor did not just live nearby. He had access through his job. Institutional access. Knowledge of systems meant to protect people like me. That realization landed harder than anything else. This was no longer about intimidation or proximity. It was about misuse of power and the intent to control what others could not see. I felt strangely calm as it sank in. Fear had burned itself out, leaving clarity behind. The threat was real. It had weight. It had reach. And it was no longer mine alone to carry. By the time the next steps were explained, I understood I would not be going home. Safety now meant distance, separation, waiting. As plans were set in motion, I realized the night ahead would be defined not by action, but by stillness, and the long quiet that follows when the truth finally settles. That night passed in a place that was safe but unfamiliar. The room was quiet, guarded, and still. Yet my body refused to rest. I lay there fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, aware of every breath. Safety had been enforced, not earned, and the difference mattered. Once fear loosened its grip, something emptier took its place. Relief arrived, but it was hollow, almost fragile. My hands stopped shaking, but my thoughts did not slow down. They circled back again and again, replaying small decisions that suddenly felt enormous. What if the bus route had never changed? What if I had stayed late one more night? What if routine had carried me all the way home like it always had? Each question landed the same way, not as guilt, but as disbelief at how thin the margin had been, how easily habit could have walked me straight into harm. The room felt suspended outside of time. No alarms, no schedules, Just the quiet understanding that the life I trusted had nearly ended without warning. I realized how much faith I had placed in patterns, in the idea that yesterday's safety guaranteed tomorrow's. That night taught me that protection often looks like interruption, that being forced to stop can be the very thing that saves you. As the hours stretched toward morning, I waited for daylight, knowing answers would come with it, even if peace would take longer to follow. Morning came quietly. The call arrived after sunrise, steady and direct, bringing answers I had been bracing for without realizing it. The investigation had moved through the night, and what they found filled in the spaces my fear had already traced. There was evidence inside the neighbor's place that matched the patterns I had been warned about. Notes, items taken from outside my home, records that confirmed how closely my schedule had been tracked. It was thorough in a way that felt deeply unsettling, as if my private life had been laid out and studied without my knowledge. They explained the arrest plainly. No dramatic language, no victory in their voices. Just facts. The threat was real. It had been growing. It was stopped before it reached its final point. Hearing that should have brought relief, but what I felt instead was a hollow calm, like standing in the aftermath of something that never fully happened but almost did. I thought I would cry. I did not. My body felt emptied of urgency, drained by the waiting and the shock. Justice did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy, necessary, but heavy. As the morning unfolded, I kept returning to the same thought, how close the timing had been, how routine had nearly carried me into danger because it always had before. The difference between safety and harm had been measured in minutes, in small choices I never imagined would matter. When the call ended, I sat with the truth settling into place. I was alive because someone noticed when I did not. That question stayed with me, quietly demanding an answer. Why had he seen what others missed, and what had pushed him to act when it would have been easier to look away? I kept asking myself why he noticed when no one else did. Neighbors had lived beside me for years. Co-workers knew my schedule. I had walked the same streets in plain sight. Yet it was the driver, someone passing through my life briefly each night, who saw the danger forming. The answer came quietly, without drama. He shared pieces of his past the way someone does when they are not seeking sympathy, only understanding. Years earlier, he had missed the signs once before. Someone close to him had needed help, and he had explained things away, trusted routine, assumed safety where there was none. By the time he understood, it was too late to undo the damage. That loss changed how he moved through the world. He learned to watch patterns instead of moments, to listen to discomfort instead of dismissing it. Vigilance, for him, was not fear. It was responsibility shaped by regret. Hearing that reframed everything. He had not acted out of heroism or impulse. He acted because he had learned, painfully, what happens when you look away. Paying attention was how he lived with what he could not change. I felt an unexpected connection in that understanding. Two people shaped by different losses, meeting briefly in the space where awareness mattered. Gratitude settled in, deep and steady, not dramatic but enduring. What stayed with me was this truth. Protection often comes from those who have already learned the cost of silence. Survival is sometimes passed forward, carried quietly by people who refuse to let the past repeat itself. As I moved forward, I realized that being spared did not mean returning to who I was before. It meant carrying what I had learned and deciding how to live with eyes open in a world that rarely announces its dangers. Surviving did not change my life in loud or obvious ways. There was no dramatic reinvention, no sudden courage I had not possessed before. What changed was quieter, more persistent. It settled into my days the way light shifts in a room once you notice where the windows are. I went back to work, but I no longer moved on autopilot. I paid attention to exits. I checked reflections. I varied my timing when I could. These were not acts of fear. They were acts of care. I stopped confusing familiarity with safety. Relationships changed too, though subtly. I spoke up more when something felt off. I listened longer when others hesitated. I learned that connection is not just comfort. It is awareness shared between people who are willing to look out for one another. Inside, the biggest shift was this. Fear did not stay. It softened into attentiveness. I was no longer scanning the world for threats, but I was present in a way I had not been before. I noticed people. I noticed patterns. I noticed myself. I understood that safety is not something you arrive at and keep forever. It is something you participate in. It requires intention, humility, and the willingness to accept help when it appears. Survival rearranged my priorities. Small things mattered more. Silence felt different. I no longer rushed through moments just to get to the next one. Being here became enough. As time passed, I felt a responsibility take shape alongside gratitude. What I had learned was not meant to stay only with me. Awareness had been given to me freely, at great cost to someone else. Carrying it forward felt like the natural next step, a quiet way of honoring what had saved my life. I started noticing people the way someone once noticed me. I paid attention to the quiet signals that say someone is overwhelmed but trying not to show it. At work, there was a new woman on nights, younger, moving too fast, apologizing for things that were not her fault. I recognized the tension in her shoulders because it had lived in mine. One evening, after midnight, I walked with her to the parking lot instead of peeling off toward my own ride. I did not make it a conversation or a lesson. I simply stayed present, matching her pace, letting the silence do its work. She relaxed without realizing why. It surprised me how natural it felt. Awareness had stopped being something I practiced and started being something I carried. I listened more carefully when coworkers hesitated. I noticed who lingered at the edges of rooms. I trusted discomfort as information, not weakness. These were not heroic acts. They were small decisions made in ordinary moments, offered without expectation of recognition. Kindness, I learned, does not need an audience. It only needs attention. Sometimes I think about how easily my story could have ended differently. How survival arrived through something as simple as someone choosing to look twice. That understanding changed how I move through the world. I cannot repay what was given to me, but I can extend it. I can notice. I can stay. I can refuse to look away. Passing it forward does not feel like a duty. It feels like a quiet continuation of the care that once kept me alive. When I look back on everything that happened, the lesson is quieter than people expect. Survival did not come from strength or confrontation. It came from awareness, from someone choosing to see me when I had learned to move through the world unseen, and from me learning to do the same afterward. For a long time, I believed safety was something you earned by keeping your head down and following the rules of routine. I know now that safety is relational. It lives in attention, in noticing patterns, in caring enough to pause when something feels off. It lives in kindness that does not announce itself. What saved my life was not fear or force. It was integrity. One person refusing to ignore a feeling. One person deciding that paying attention mattered more than convenience. That choice changed everything for me. This story is not really about what almost happened. It is about what did happen. I was seen. And because of that, I am still here, able to notice others, able to choose connection over distance, able to pass forward the awareness that was once given to me without condition. If there is anything I hope you take from this, it is this. Your attention matters more than you think. Your small acts of care might be the reason someone else makes it home safely. We never know the full impact of choosing to stay present. Thank you for listening to my story and holding space for it. If you feel comfortable, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever noticed something small that turned out to matter more than you expected? Or has someone's quiet kindness ever changed your path? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one.